What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by Ryan Schofield, host of the Scho Zone and a disgruntled St. Louis Cardinals fan. How you doing today, Ryan?
I'm doing very good. I'm doing good. I don't have the baseball season to disappoint me yet. I'm frozen in time. I'm waiting to get that first notification that the Cardinals actually spent $1 this offseason. But not going to hold my breath on that. So to pass the time, I just figured I'd have a conversation and get myself acquainted with you. So thanks for having me on, bro.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for coming on. I think we're about probably a month or two away from pitchers and catchers reporting. So in any minute now, we'll be
It,
at opening day.
So I grew up in the Northeast, and I feel like that the attachment with a baseball team is different because this is the time of year where, I mean, in regular time growing up at my age, this used to be the end of the football season already. We just had the college football national title just took place the other day. Sports are just so different throughout my lifetime right now. But, the interest in a baseball team is what kind of got you through the hard months in the Northeast up here where we just don't go outside. And thankfully, we have smartphones and other devices to do right now because the Cardinals have done absolutely nothing. And they're just, because then the sign of baseball season starting is the sign of springtime coming. And that's really, I feel like, where I have some of my close attachment to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So today's topic is the top three what-ifs in St. Louis Cardinals history. So we're going to be talking about some pivotal moments that either went well or went negatively for the Cardinals, maybe some free agent signings, things like that, that had they gone another way, history would have looked much different. So before we jump into your first what if, why are you a Cardinals fan?
So it's a family illness. No, I don't call it illness, but it's actually one of my favorite stories to tell people that actually in the city of St. Louis. So I grew up in upstate New York, outside of Albany, New York, in a city called Troy, and my father. They put on a Cardinals hat when I was a kid. My father was a Cardinals fan, and the Schofield family were Cardinals fans. And everyone always asks, how does somebody from upstate New York end up a St. Louis Cardinals fan? So one, I got it from my parents, but how did that become a thing? Apparently, my grandfather, who I never met, was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan because we're about 2 hours away from New York City or 2.5 hours from New York City. In his weird way, he was one of those stubborn old men that when they moved from Brooklyn to L.A., he did not approve of that. That's how he was wired, apparently. And St. Louis was always the westernmost city for baseball. They were the gateway to the West. So apparently his mindset was that, my loyalty only goes as far as St. Louis.
As
And
the
then we stumbled
Mississippi.
on there. And apparently KMOX, the radio station, used to be able to come available on the AM feed here. So that's how that became about with my family becoming Cardinals fans. And then, when you're younger, you have no control over that. So football team, my father was a Packers fan. My father worked on Sunday. But, you always listen to the music that's in daddy's radio. You root for dad's favorite team. And because I liked playing baseball, and really I think hook, line, and sinker, what got it for me is that one of my first conscious memories, even as a kid, is I want to say I was like 5 years old. We went to Olympic Stadium in Montreal. And I remember seeing Ozzie Smith. And, Ozzie Smith was an entertaining guy to watch, or something to that whole element to it. And I guess just I'm kind of wired in this way where I like being different. So everybody in this area is a Mets or a Yankees or a Red Sox fan. I like being that different guy. And I have conducted my life in a way that if I've ever been encountered with you, when you think of the St. Louis Cardinals, the first ugly face that you think of is mine. The first loud voice you hear in your head is mine. So that's kind of where my story with being a Cardinals fan.
That's awesome. Yeah. For whatever reason, maybe pure coincidence, but this is the third St. Louis related podcast I've recorded in the last month. I'm not sure what the draw is, but we're 3 for 3. And of course,
You had Rams and Blues on?
No, it was kind of the history of pro sports in St.
Okay.
Louis. And then we did kind of a more negative one of why teams left St. Louis, and especially the Rams, and kind of the sordid details around why the Rams left. So I think this one's going to be a little bit more positive than the
No,
last
absolutely.
two.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I can have my negative thing. Now, I'm curious what you had on that because I would say that I actually, when I went back to St. Louis, which I mean, did have a negative experience as far as I was in St. Louis when the Cardinals lost 2 out of 3 games to the White Sox this year, which is they're the worst team in the history of baseball, and the Cardinals lost the series to them at home.
Sure.
But I also did go to see them in the Battle Hawks, the UFL team or whatever they have there.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the Edward Jones Dome, and there was 30 some odd thousand people on a nice summer, nice weather day. Where I'm like, these guys really do. I think that what's positive about St. Louis is that they used to be such a significant city in America, and now they're kind of in that small market. They get that label, so they have that underdog mentality, and I kind of like that. Maybe that's where I get some attachment to them as well as too. Is that I'm not a big guy, myself. I was always that underdog when I played sports, so I think I also identify with that as well. But I kind of felt like that they were a little bit swindled as far as they were always supporting the Rams. The owner just made it. It was kind of like the movie Major League brought to life was what my understanding of it was. And they're very prideful about their sports loyalties.
Yeah, and they
Their
had,
soccer team has the highest attendance.
yeah, we definitely talked about St. Louis City SC on the history of the pro sports one, and St. Louis being like the hotbed or the birthplace of American soccer, and they finally have a team. And of course, we talked about the Battlehawks and the fact that there's always an appetite for pro football, but I think people are so burnt by the NFL that I don't know if an NFL team could come back. Maybe not as an expansion team, or not a team moving. Maybe an expansion team at some point. But they do have a great city pride, and they have a great sports culture. And I think that's a good segue to our first what if. So, what you got for me?
My first what if, so this is probably, I'm going to just say, are we doing any of order of significance or just a random what if?
It's however you want to present
Okay,
it.
so
If you want to go significance, that's fine. You want to go chronological, that's fine too. But we're just here to shoot the breeze here.
Okay, so one that I have right now because I'm curious what this would have meant for the history of their franchise. What if Oscar Taveras did not die?
That was a big one. I posted the question on Cardinals Reddit, and a lot of people brought this one up. So expand on that one.
So here was always this funny thing is that he came out about as a prospect. He was kind of going to be like the Cardinals version of the Mike Trouts, and it was around that time period. And I always laugh because like that was when like baseball fans are really prideful and really competitive about who knows, like I hate the expression you don't know ball, but like baseball fans love to be smarter than each other. And I used to hear all of these people would always tell me about Oscar Taveras and how lucky I was as a Cardinals fan that the Cardinals had them. And like, as far as I'm concerned, I had Albert Pujols. And as a sports fan, you are never going to have, it's very unlikely you're ever going to have somebody that was as dominant in their prime of their career be on your favorite team. It's like being a Chiefs fan right now at Mahomes. Albert Pujols was that level of guy there. Oscar Taveras was billed up as this guy, but I always wondered how everyone has such strong opinions of him when he was this prospect from a foreign country. And I'm like, like people made it seem like that there was this Oscar Taveras network I joked around about that like he did nothing but baseball greatness and he was just, everything was just perfect. But the way that he was built up, and you could kind of see it as far as that, given his size and frame and the buildup that he had to him, and he did have that one big home run in the playoffs or like that, it was the idea that he was going to be the next superstar for the Cardinals. So when that did not happen, that was, kind of, it sets you back because you do believe you have a generational player, and then it's not even that he doesn't pan out, it's that he doesn't even get the chance to pan out. So that's a huge what if because you wonder where from that 2011 after losing Pujols, having a guy like an Oscar Taveras was supposed to be, again, the Cardinals do not spend money. So them buying one of these big name players is not their way of doing things. They need to get that guy as a rookie and get them hooked and addicted to what it's like to be a St. Louis Cardinal so that way that they can get him for that little bit longer. With the Pujols situation, I honestly thought that was the best thing that could have happened both ways, or maybe that's another what if, actually.
That is another what if, yeah.
Okay,
Don't want to step on that
step
one.
with the Oscar Taveras one. That's going to be, and that's where I'll go with, yes, the Oscar Taveras what if, because he was hyped up as being this generational player. Again, more times than not, generational players do not fit the billing, but that was supposed to be their next stud and maybe could have carried them through this period where they have not had that. The Cardinals are always supposed to be a homegrown talent, and they have not simply. Right now, people are leaving St. Louis to get better, not coming to St. Louis to get better.
What is it about the team that keeps them from spending money? I mean, I don't consider them a small market team. I know the city of St. Louis is small. St. Louis County and the surrounding metro is, I don't know, 2-3 million. It's one of the bigger media markets, I guess. Is it just ownership being cheap? Why don't they spend money?
That's what it comes down to, is that it becomes, and this was something that was a slap in the face to me during the COVID era. This was an actual statement from our GM, or from our ownership, where he said something about baseball not being as profitable as people think it is. And I'm just kind of sitting there where I'm like, they're giving out the biggest contracts for, and they're all guaranteed, and
Yeah, these guys
and
are
because
printing money.
the money, I mean, the idea of all the consumption of it and stuff like that, and I'm just sitting there as a St. Louis Cardinals fan who, because I was an idiot, I was not financially well off, and I'm still not that. I'm like, well, what was going to be, or living high off the hog. But in my 20s, where I struggled and stuff, and where I would make a trip to St. Louis, which would cost me tons of money, and I'm sitting in my living room, and I have 14 St. Louis Cardinals logos present in my living room, and I'm going, where's all this money going? That kind of rubbed me the wrong way, where they just certain teams realize that there's a good business in having loyalty, and that was actually something I noticed as in Buffalo, is that you can sell false hope at high levels, where it's like the Cardinals took for granted that they could always have, if we are just good enough to say we have a chance, we can fill the stands. And that's kind of where they got into there. And we're finally having some standards. I mean, the Cardinals have the second most World Series titles in baseball history. And the idea that, like, you can sell this, hey, we're always in it. And when we have, look at the two World Series that they won in my lifetime, 2006 and 2011. Not great teams. I mean, kind of they made these little savvy things, but never seeking out there. And I think it's because, they've been able to fill the stands and profit up on the loyalty. And the fans are finally kind of starting to speak out a little bit. They finally had a decline in attendance. And maybe that's going to impact us now. But I think that the owners look at this more as a business, not as a right, I guess I would say.
Yeah,
Not a right, but a privilege to own a sports
exactly.
team.
Yeah, it absolutely is a privilege, especially when you're dealing with one of these legacy teams and legacy franchises that are tied to a city's identity and all that. So, yeah, that's a shame. It's funny that you mentioned Albert Pujols a couple times because that was my number one what if. And this is back to the 2011 offseason. So coming off a World Series victory, the second of his career, the second of your lifetime, as you mentioned. And there was a bit of a not contract dispute, but from what my understanding is they initially offered him 5 years and he wanted a 10-year deal. And he ends up getting a 10-year deal from the Angels. The Cardinals try to match that, but they're still about $40 million off, which is not, I guess it's a significant amount of money over 10 years. But I think in general, had he stayed there, obviously he would have been the franchise leader in every major category. He would have blown away the home run record, the hits record, all that stuff. And I think more from a personal perspective for Pujols, it's unfortunate because he goes from one of the legacy franchises in the league to kind of a loser franchise in the Angels. He makes one playoff appearance in 10 years. They waste him. They waste Mike Trout. So I feel like that's a big what if, because if he stayed in St. Louis, it would have been, I don't know how you feel if he's the greatest Cardinal in history or not, but I think it would have been no argument had he stayed in the city.
So the thing with the Pujols situation was that was during the era of time where every player that was performing at a high level, it was always that they were on steroids was the issue that people worried about. With Albert Pujols, we did not have any type of real smoking gun accusations or anything like that. People just thought whatever it was. But there was always the idea with St. Louis fans is that what we still believe is that bro's 2 years older than he says he is. So
But
that
that's one
was
of the
kind of the
reasons he
idea
dropped
that,
in the
that you were getting
draft,
on
right?
there. And you were starting to get to the point of that, when you are a team that has had somebody your star in your backyard, you do know of what physically is going on with them. And then a guy of his size just, he's not like he was just a naturally big guy. I mean, I'm sure he worked out and everything like that, but like they don't typically age out too well. It's like, he kept his weight down, but something tells me if he was not a hardcore player, he would have ballooned up. Like, I'm sure he's going to be a heavy set guy at some point in his post playing career, is where I look at Pools. For them to have paid that contract, would have hamstrung them so bad because they did spend money well on that one. So with the Cardinals, they signed Matt Holliday to a contract before that, to like a 7-year, $110 million contract. And like, it's funny how we've evolved in sports. When you said the $40 million difference on there, that used to be a big deal, man. Like,
Used to be.
like that used to be like, a really, really big deal, that extra 40 million. So, I looked at it as that, they knew what they were going to do, but it was kind of a good party for both ways. Because again, he didn't have any postseason success going forward, and the Cardinals did find themselves in the World Series. Now, they did not have that difference-making player. They just had really, really good, well-rounded teams. They allocated resources very, very well and very smart efficiently, unlike they do right now. And that's where I looked at that it was actually not the worst thing that would have happened. Because if they had him with the level of production he was giving and the fact that the National League did not have the DH, and the way his physical breakdown. I mean, there was a point in time when he was in LA where it was painful for me as a Cardinals fan to watch him try to run out a ground ball. Like it just, he just didn't have that look. And then it set this fairy tale ending to an extent of that he comes back to St. Louis for that final year. Unfortunately, that's what started bothering me about the team is that I looked at that year was more of selling this, farewell tour than it was actually trying to compete. I digress. That was what it was. And, depending on what baseball research you follow, that idea that maybe the baseball was feeding Aaron Judge and Albert Pujols different styles of baseballs that season. It is what it is, but it
Oh, I
made for a
hadn't
great
heard this.
story. Oh, there's the Goldilocks ball theory.
Tell me more.
There's a guy on Twitter. He's a really big prominent in the baseball community. His name is Ryan Spader. At the Ace of Spader is his handle. But he was insinuating that, at one point in time, he was predicting that Aaron Judge was going to make a home run run. And there was a study on various ball samples at certain games, and they found that there was 3 different levels of balls as far as the liveliness to them, and there was some balls that the sample of them found were predominantly at Yankee and Cardinals games, mostly at Yankee games that year. So it's just food for thought on that one. I mean, I don't want to believe it so much, but I mean, the thing was, it was nice that the Cardinals did allocate Pujols very well, is that they made him a platoon right-handed hitter because the guy still had one skill. And that's the thing is that, if you were paying him the money that the Angels were paying him to do that, that's no good. But when he's a, utility guy like the way he was, then, that was a fine use for him. And glad that he got to get that 700 there. But then for them to, he ended up being one of their better players on a team that did nothing.
Yeah, in his early 40s, which is a testament. Well, I mean, I guess we don't really know how old he is.
Right, and I mean, again, he did not look. I mean, he wasn't legging him out. So I mean, we made a spectacle of. I think he had a double or something like that, or a triple, where it was like, all right, this is kind of funny watching him move at this point in time, or like I think it was like a first to home thing where it's like, I know what it's like. I'm getting to my almost to be 40, where it's like there's times where I think I'm fast, and then I look at the clock, like oh shit, how long did that mile take? Like it's like we're slowing down. It happens.
Yeah, I got
But
you. All
so
right,
that was where I was at the pools on there.
cool. So what is your second what if here?
Going on to another what if of what potentially could have been a generational player, but what if Rick Ankiel never got the yips? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rick Ankiel and that whole saga.
I'm not. I'm familiar with the yips as a concept, but tell me more.
So Rick Ankiel was this studded pitching prospect for the St. Louis Cardinals around 2001, I want to say, 2000 season. I believe he was finished third for Rookie of the Year. His whole thing is that they got him as a prospect, and he was 19 or 20 years old, and it was that he had top notch curveball. And there was this whole idea of he has the tools to be in the major league. He's major league ready as far as his stuff, but do we want to mentally put this guy through it at 19 years old? We didn't have these young phenom kids now, and they've almost set the pressure so high because now it's that you're almost expected to be a 19-year-old phenom. But that was before we gave them the chances, but there was also the worry of that if this doesn't work out, do we damage a good physical skill set by killing their mind? So Rick Ankiel becomes they finally call him up for he pitches pretty much, I think, a full season. Ends up being the game 1 starter of a playoff game against the Atlanta Braves. Cardinals are comfortably ahead in this game, but he throws 1 or 2 wild pitches that just kind of the game was out of question, but it was like what happened there kind of thing. And this manifested into him legitimately having the yips as a pitcher. And him, throwing a ton of wild pitches, and all of a sudden just losing it, going to the minor leagues and just literally losing the ability as a pitcher to throw it to home plate, which is, ended up doing that. Now, Rick Ankiel's story ended up being that he ended up reinventing himself as a position player, ended up almost having this Disney kind of moment with the Cardinals, where the Cardinals were a struggling team in the early 2000s, or sometime in the mid 2000s there. And he came back and gave a little spark plug where he hit some walk-off home runs, and he actually had 2 of the greatest outfield throws I've ever seen in my entire life, because this was a guy who had as good of a pitching arm as anybody. It wasn't like he was throwing off the chain velocity-wise. But if you type in Rick Ankiel outfield assist, you'll see these 2 throws he makes at Coors Field that are as good of any outfield throws you're ever going to see in your life. But he was going to be one of those can't-miss pitching prospects, maybe a Clayton Kershaw of his own generation as far as the curveball he was supposed to have, who just lost the yips all because of through freak circumstances. Ended up being the thing that they feared ended up actually happening. That they feared that they would put him in a high pressure situation and he would mentally implode. And then suddenly a guy who was as good of anybody as throwing a ball 60 feet 6 inches could not throw it to hit the broadside of a barn.
Hmm. This is probably before the advent of like sports psychology as a thing and finding ways to work through it. So do you think maybe
We did
if
not
this
have. I
happened
mean,
now, it would have been different?
I don't even know if now. I mean, we may say that we're a little bit more accepting or a little bit, softened our nature as sports fans, but yeah, I don't think in that, there was, yeah, there probably wasn't spoken to positively, or the way that you were talked about back then is probably not playing in 2025 as well, as far as maybe, questioning someone's mental fortitude or total
Yeah,
sanity,
I
I
think
guess you would
I
say.
mean
They
more
were,
from like
we would,
a
you would tag on somebody for that being weakness. Now you actually feel bad
yeah.
for them a little bit more. And that was kind of one of those ones where even him at that time, but I mean, like when Chuck Knobloch for the Yankees got it, it was made fun of. That was the whole
Yeah.
ordeal. So it's kind of like this moment, it was a little bit more because he was still young, but no, I guess yeah, I don't know. They definitely didn't have quite the way we did now, which I still don't know if we've even got sports psychology right.
Yeah, I mean more from like a team perspective, like knowing that there is a fix for this using psychology. I mean, fans are going to be fans. I mean, I think they're going to rip on the guy no matter what, and they might be harsh on him depending on how much money he's making and all that. But I mean more from like a team perspective, like the same
Right,
way,
how
you
your
know,
teammates handle this? Yeah, because I'd say your
yeah,
teammates probably in 2000 probably were not going to be the most receptive, I guess I would say, or as like that was probably when you know people use locker room talk a little more freely. I'll just say.
sure, sure. Okay, cool. All right, I'll share my second what if. So this is a little more recent than well, actually about around the same time as the Pujols situation. This is the 2011 World Series. This is Game Six. This is what if Nelson Cruz makes a better play on the ball in the
I
bottom
would
of the ninth in
say
Game Six.
I would go even deeper. What if Nelson Cruz wasn't in the game? Like
Yeah, he
like
probably
that's
shouldn't
kind
have
of
been in the game.
like there's always one of these things of that when you bring in a defensive replacement, like you're always kind of wondering, like, is it that important? And especially when it's a bat like Nelson Cruz. Nelson Cruz was also young enough in his career that I mean he was like he was I was a fantasy baseball player. I knew of how well of a player he was, but to the everyday baseball fan at that time. But yeah, if he makes that catch now, I have one of the worst stories I can share as a Cardinals fan. It's kind of funny and sad, but it's also kind of one that I reflect on. So a little bit of a background on me is that I have not had a drink in over about 2.5 years. And one of my, I guess I would say, what should have been the sign moments was I actually was blacked out drunk and passed out during that moment in Game Six.
No,
So what happened with me is that I was not watching the games with anybody. I was not going out and about. I'm the only Cardinals fan. I was where I was living. So I was watching the games by myself at my house because like the bar I would hang out at, it was never told, hey, don't bring that shit here. It was just kind of like I didn't want to be around because I know that if people try to push my buttons, like I was very emotional about my sports teams at that point in time. I don't have that. I wish I cared that much now. They've broken me to that point, I guess I would say. Or maybe I've just kind of realized there's more important things in life than your sports team and
yeah, it
having your
comes
sanity
with
attached
age
to
and
it maybe
maturity. Yeah,
isn't again, I was a heavy drinker this time. So I had like gone out to like, for lunch with my buddy that day and like had a good old time. Went home and like was drinking beers during that game. And the Cardinals were they were down 6-3 in that game and it was not looking good. And I had a bottle of Jameson in my house and not being, I had too much to drink to go drive more and get more beer. So I started drinking the Jameson and then I ended up passing out and waking up to all these missed phone calls and text messages. But the I guess, interesting part about all this is that when I woke up, I turned on MLB Network and they were replaying the game shortly around where I blacked out. So I got to relive this moment. So, like, in my head at the time, I told myself it was funny that I missed the biggest moments or probably the best baseball moments, arguably ever. At least it's in the conversation. You can't win or lose that argument as far as I'm concerned. But that I didn't. Now I kind of find it of going like that should have been a sign that you had a problem, buddy. Like what do you do this for? So, but yes, if Nelson Cruz makes a catch, um, that's. I mean, that you got to realize how magical that 2011 St. Louis Cardinals team is. There's if you ever want to actually bring me to tears, not because of the moment I just mentioned, but there's a compilation video called "What a Team, What a Ride." that's playing with you end up hearing the song "Every Tear Has a Water" or "Every Teardrop Has a Waterfall" by Coldplay playing, and it's showing the Cardinals kind of journey through the season and the comeback in that moment. But that team was also the one that was left for dead before the playoffs. They were 9.5 games out, I believe, going into September. And I actually outlined as a fan, like I was a stand-up comedian at that time. I remember I was actually going into a comedy contest and I was sitting at a bar with my buddies and discussing with them how the Cardinals were actually going to make this comeback and actually get into the playoffs and how they were a scary, dangerous team. And then for that to actually come to, that was just a overall just absolutely just magical team that unlike any other. And where I think that maybe I've realized my sports fandom peaks. So if Nelson Cruz makes that catch, I probably have a different like outlook on life or a different outlook as a sports fan as the Cardinals, where I probably would be that bitter person that demanded, or they probably would still affect my mental psyche because there was something about my attachment to that team. Chris Carpenter was my favorite pitcher, big game pitcher of the Cardinals of my Cardinals lifetime. And I feel like there was almost like divine intervention that they won that World Series because everyone forgets this. Actually, I have another what if after this.
Yeah, please. But yeah, first of all, congrats on your sobriety. It's awesome to hear. But yeah, that was a big moment. I mean, there's a couple different outcomes. Obviously, if he's playing further back and he makes the catch, then it's bottom of the ninth, 2 outs. That's game over. They win the series 4-2. If he just plays it a little better off the wall, maybe he catches the runner at third, and it doesn't
I
tie the
don't think
game,
that.
and then
No,
it ends. So,
there were with 2 outs, he never was going to have a chance of getting
yeah,
anybody at third. What I would say is that it's like always one of these things of that I still play beer league softball, and everyone says first step back. Everyone, for some reason, it's something weird, and it's like probably in that moment because you have to wonder how aware you are of the moments of that there are 2 outs, but are you thinking there are 2 outs in the World Series, and then for you to almost make the most fundamental mistake on the biggest stage of not making your first step back or even making a step at all, I don't even think he made. It is amazing. But again, maybe it was exposed later on that he wasn't a great fielder, but the guy made his bones as a DH most of his career. And maybe you could have, I don't know the lineup situations as to why he was not, there was not a defensive replacement out there for him. But
yeah, he's
yeah, but
just
if he
not.
makes that catch, I mean, it's game over. And it was, hey, the Cardinals came up short, but it was an amazing. I mean, that 2011 Rangers team is one of the most ridiculous lineups to never win a World Series. When you look at that lineup, I mean, the idea, like I said, I think Nelson Cruz batted sixth on that team. Like, there was some fucking studs. Excuse me, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to swear or not on this
No,
show.
please, it's all good.
There were some absolute studs, and I mean, Josh Hamilton again on the theme of sobriety. I mean, like everyone forgets how good he was, and then I mean, like again, just that 2011 Rangers team was scary good. I remember being
Yeah.
terrified during that World Series.
Yeah, and of course that was Game 6. The Cardinals go on to win Game 7 pretty convincingly, I think 6-2. So that was the hard part, was winning Game 6. So what is your third and final what if here today?
So I'm gonna do this on for the recency of things. We're gonna have an honorable mention section, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the biggest what if of this one, and I actually I'm ashamed I didn't bring this up first. What if it does not rain the day after Game 6 is one of the biggest ones. You have to realize the Cardinals would not have a pitcher. Like Carpenter was able to gut it out as a starter, but like if they did not rain Game 6, the Cardinals pitching staff was in a scary the day after Game 6 and buying them an extra day off. The Cardinals pitching staff was in a scary situation.
I didn't know that. I mean,
So
it's funny how weather can play a role. I mean, I think when you mentioned the rain, I thought about the Cubs, Game 6, 2016, and the rain delay that allowed them to basically bounce back and come back in dramatic fashion. Or was that Game 7? It might have been.
That was Game 7. That was Game 7.
Yeah.
That was as real as it could be because I was. You never come back from a moment like blowing the. It's just like like when Rajay Davis of all people when that hits that walk, to tie the game up like there, like teams just do not, like they say the momentum is not real, but that is real. But actually getting a break to get that action on there. And, at the big point in time as a Cardinals fan, the Jason Hayward signing with the Cubs was a big point of contention. Allegedly, he gave this wonderful speech and loosened their spirits up, and they got the win on that one. But, that is a major thing in baseball. I mean, as far as weather does affect certain things, I mean, cold weather affects power hitting teams. You have to do things differently for sure. But that's definitely a big what if because that's a kind of a forgotten story of that whole World Series. And, and it's one of those things of that. I definitely made sure I was sober enough to appreciate the Game 7 after what happened in Game 6, but still had a little bit while before I got my act together, obviously. But that was that was something, kind of that whole thing. And like, I always had the whole thing, and there was always, it was a bittersweet feeling when the team wins, is that, I only had my father to call kind of deal. And like, there's a lonely feeling when you watch a team by yourself when you're not physically with other people. But yeah, that was my what if.
No, I totally appreciate wanting to watch it by yourself. I mean, I tell my wife if the Raiders ever make it to the Super Bowl, I'm watching that with me and the kids and maybe her, or maybe I'll just lock myself in a room. But I'm a Warriors fan and I preferred watching the finals games. The other playoff games, sure, we can watch that with friends, but finals game, it's serious. I need to focus and not be distracted at a bar or restaurant or whatever it is. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Right, just because so when you're in a bar, you're asking for the experience of that somebody there may have too much to drink, given the time of the games are going to be on there. It just takes one person that just want to get a rise out of you, which is not you're not in a. Fans are so irrational, okay? Like, and I almost wonder if I like am jealous that I don't have that feeling towards my favorite teams anymore, or if I'm glad I've moved on from it. I don't. I still don't know how to answer that one, for
Yeah, I
sure.
don't think you ever will. It's probably a little bit of both. It's bittersweet, I think.
Because at this
Uh,
point now, too, now that I'm older than these guys, like, it's one thing when, you're younger, these guys can kind of be heroes to you. Now it's just like, oh, there's the guy that hit the genetic lottery that we know didn't screw up along the way. Like, or that
exactly,
worked.
exactly.
There's the hardworking guy that was born with this freak talent that, is prospering and wears the jersey of a team that I like.
Yeah, it's a different relationship. So my third what if, this one goes a little further back. This is back to the 1970s, and this is what if the Cardinals didn't trade away Steve Carlton? So we talked about the $40 million being a difference with Albert Pujols. My understanding it was like 30 grand back then.
Oh, I
Um,
mean, that's
and yeah, I was gonna say they end up trading him to the Phillies for a average pitcher, and he goes on to become one of the best pitchers in MLB history. Helps the Phillies win a World Series. So I think that's a big what if for obviously both the Phillies and the Cardinals and baseball history in general.
Yes, because the Cardinals in the 70s, I think, took a step back. I don't know if they actually even appeared in a World Series in the 70s or maybe not until later in the 70s. But Carlton being quite the, that would have been the bridge from Gibson to, to Carlton or, having those guys there. It did kind of set the wave, though, of that. I forget if that happened. That had to have happened before Kurt Flood, though, correct?
Yeah, so it wasn't free agency. He was technically, I mean, they didn't have free agency back then. I
Right,
want to
but
say
that's
Kurt
kind
Flood
of.
was 73, 74, something like that. So he just held out, didn't show up to camp, spring training, whatever, and he ends up getting traded in the second year of this contract dispute with Cardinals ownership.
Right, but it was kind of one of those things of that there was the almost kind of there wasn't the union wasn't quite there yet, I don't believe, or it wasn't quite as strong as it was where there was the idea that there was almost like this collusion amongst owners that nobody really bid after each other's players kind of deal, and the contracts were kind of, there was not that much wiggle room on there, that's kind of my understanding of the times on there.
Yeah, it was
So
basically
it's
if
it's
you
not as
were
it's almost not even as much about the money as that that was a prideful generation of men, and I think that it becomes more about that, and that's kind of just both sides lost on that.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
how I would look
absolutely.
at it. I don't know if that was necessarily the Reds were such a powerhouse in the 70s that I don't know if the Cardinals were the gap was really that the close there as far as as far as what the Reds were putting out there. The Reds kind of were dominant. I don't think that that would have narrowed the gap to Steve Carlton, but yeah, I mean, but I feel like the instances like that are what set things in motion to give the players more power.
Yeah, and it was such a common thing back then. I mean, I just finished reading this book about the swinging A's in the 70s, and these guys were always just agitating for a little bit more money and ownership, at least for the A's, and it seems like everywhere else. Teams just didn't want to pay these guys because they had exclusive rights. They didn't have to pay them unless the guy was willing to sit out and, you know, endure hate from fans and fines and all that stuff. So it's just a very, very different era compared to what we're seeing today.
Well, what I would say with that is that I mean, like, it's almost one of those things that it is amazing how, in some cases, grossly underpaid those players were because I feel like that with our lack of entertainment options and the way that people had a closer, where they lived amongst the people a little bit more, they were more of a man of the town kind of thing. So people had this extra attachment. So the fact that you're kind of feeling like a superstar, but you're not really able to do superstar things because there's a couple guys here and there. I mean, it's always one of those weird things with, yes, our contracts getting ridiculous in sports right now, but it's also the idea of going, I'm siding on the billionaires, not the millionaires in this case.
Hmm.
Like, the money's there,
Yeah.
for someone to spend, it's not coming from nowhere. And it's almost if we could ever look away, which we can't, then money wouldn't be there. But that's our own problem as fans sometimes.
Exactly. And I think baseball fans always want to talk about a salary cap, so these teams can't spend. And I'm sitting here as an A's fan talking about a salary floor and wishing that, teams would be forced to spend a certain amount of money.
Right, that's the idea. I mean, give the competitive nature because again, you can have a good business and be getting lucky. I mean, because the rules of baseball, they do give you ways to play the system that you can. I mean, let's face it, the Astros kind of showed that bottoming it out is the right way to do it. There is a way to tank. In baseball, the tank does work because of the way that you can allocate things. You can trade, the way you can get, the qualifying offers on 1-year contracts of veterans or whatever. You sign them to 1-year contracts, you then make them the qualifying offer, which they never accept, then you get draft compensation and being able to just load up on all these prospects. I mean, there is a way of turning that around, which the Astros have shown. And that's kind of where you can start selling this hope here, where it's like, I look at a team like the Kansas City Royals, where it's like, you look at them and they almost won back-to-back World Series where for that one period of time, they weren't scared to spend money because they saw an opportunity to actually do it there. And that's kind of the way I looked at them going into this season where they were, okay, we just paid Bobby Witt. This is now the time to act because if you look at the rest of their division, nobody else in there is willing to spend money. So there is this idea that you actually can buy a division title. But for the most part there, other teams do not see business where they can just literally just play in front of empty ballparks and, just have games on TV and, just the revenue sharing there is that you can just always make money just by owning that logo.
Yeah, exactly. I think salary floor is the way
Salary
to go.
floor, give them the idea of doing that, but it's that, the salary cap argument is that we say, look at what is going on with the Chiefs in football right now. There's a salary cap there, and there's a super team we can't stop. So whether we're worried about the Dodgers might win a bunch of World Series right now because they're doing what they're doing, it's that we need more teams that need to challenge, like I want them to be inspiring people because every team does have the money to do what they are doing. It's just that they want to pocket that money is the difference. And that's what's going on with the Cardinals. They've got rich ownership, but they are electing to line their pockets, not put the product on the field.
Exactly. You're preaching to the choir here. So we both gave our 3 what ifs. What honorable mentions do you have? We can do these kind of quick lightning style.
So I have 2 of them. One of them I didn't want to necessarily discuss as much because I forget all the facts of it and it kills me. But 1985, the year I was born, what if Don Deckerger, I think is his name, what if he makes the right call at first base? I mean, it doesn't change my lifetime because, yes, the Cardinals have an extra World Series, but that's obviously one of the biggest what ifs ever because everything that happened afterwards, but that would be where I would start off first of that. I just wasn't alive to really truly feel the pain of that moment. So it's tough for me to really comment on, I guess I would say. But that's certainly a what if because that's another World Series title. And my main purpose for living in this world as somebody who lives in New York is I just want to be alive long enough to find out the Yankees don't have the most World Series.
It might take a while.
It's going to be a tough life, but I got to fight through this. Not drinking gives me a better chance.
Absolutely. That's a good one. That one did come up on Reddit and a couple other places where I was doing my research. It was, I think they were winning 1-0, bottom of the ninth. I forget the exact situation, but basically he called the runner safe when he was clearly out. And so it's one of those things where if instant replay was here, it would be a completely different conversation, and the Cardinals would have another World Series. This is kind of a fun one. I don't know how you feel about Barry Bonds, but apparently the Cardinals were chasing him in 2001. And they had an offer out, but San Francisco matched the offer, and he ends up not signing, obviously in St. Louis. But I think it would have been a fun one if you think about the team with him, Jim Edmonds, Albert Pujols, Scott Rowland. Like the amount of firepower on that team would have been incredible.
Yes. So I don't know. So at that point in time in 2001, you say.
Yeah, it was the 2001 season,
so
the 2001
was
offseason.
Just on the scene there. That was actually when I think that they had just moved on from McGuire. So this is when the Cardinals kind of had that money kind of allocated there. Edmonds had been there. I don't think that Rowland, I think they acquired sometime that season, maybe during the year. But yes, it would have been good there. What the Cardinals ended up getting at some point in time in there, which was painful about the 2004, was they did get Larry Walker. No, Bonds on the Cardinals, that would have been something else because it is sad that with Barry Bonds with the steroids thing, and I've changed my tune on that as I've grown older on things, but looking back in my sports fandom history, there's never been a more person better at what they did than Barry Bonds played baseball during the steroid, and it's one of the it's a true crime, like sad story, really. That it's like we can't appreciate this, and I get it on both sides, but it's like this shows the reason why we should care about these things. Because look at what this guy was doing when we knew what he wasn't before, and that was already really good. But I've never seen anybody that was better at what they did than Barry Bonds when he was on, the 73 home run
Hmm.
season, or what he was doing. The level that you don't even, the idea that you just need to phase this guy out of the game. We need to find a way for him to not exist and maybe make one mistake, and he's still going to get, every time you make that mistake, he's going to do it. And if he did that for St. Louis, they probably would have won a World Series.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument, like you said, that he's the one of the best athletes in not just MLB history, but in American history. One of the best people, doing what he does, which is knocking the ball out of the park. So, I think steroids aside, I think if he wasn't an asshole, he'd be in the Hall of Fame, which I think
It's
is unfortunate. But yeah, it's also sad the way his career ended, where I don't think he ever really officially retired. They just teams colluded not to sign him after I think it
right.
was the '07 season. So just it's a real bummer how that went down.
Absolutely. That was, exactly how it went down. And yeah, yeah, it's,
That's a separate podcast.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
no,
we
it
could
is,
do
and
a whole
I forgot
podcast on that.
I had a different point that I was going to articulate, but I got listening to you. It was one of those things where I was like, "Don't say it," and then I started listening, and then I lost it there.
All good.
Um,
So what's your second honorable mention?
so I look at this one as that there's a this is when you know you're a fan, is when you can get so precise. But what if Seth Maness didn't hang a sinker to Johnny Gomes? Is my biggest one in
Okay.
2013, because the
You're
Cardinals
gonna have
were
to
up
tell me more
two.
about this one.
All right, this is how specific it gets. So the 2013 Cardinals were a special one to me as well too, because this is where I got to bask in my glory of being a Cardinals fan. Of that, they won in 2011, and now it's kind of the 2012. They had a decent team, I believe, but 2013 they had this team of just like they were just a well-rounded team. Yadi Molina, kind of in his highlights here, I believe they had a couple like six guys at 20 home runs on this team or whatever. But either way, they're in the World Series. They had the highest batting average with runners in scoring position ever. That was the whole ordeal. They're in the World Series against the Red Sox. Absolutely can't. I feel bad that I rooted for the Red Sox to beat the Yankees before, because then the Red Sox became the most insufferable fan base out of all of them. Like when I saw a Red Sox fan with a "Got Rings" shirt because they won two in a had won two in like a short period of time, it's like, listen, God, I hated you so much for that. That's all I can say is just that, you went from 86 years of nothing to now you're flexing on this one. So Red Sox fans became very insufferable, and like, I am actually surrounded by some of them. The Cardinals were up 2 games to 1 in that World Series, and I want to say in like the sixth or seventh inning, they were also up in the game 2-1, and it was they had one out. The Red Sox had two guys on, and like Seth Maness was a middle relief pitcher that was as automatic as it could be for getting. He had a sinker ball that he would always get the double play ball and get them out of an inning. And he had Johnny Gomes in a 2-1 or a 3-1 count. I forget which one precisely. And he hung the sinker ball, and Johnny Gomes crushed it over the wall. And suddenly it was a 4-2 ball game. And then from that point on, the Cardinals, I don't think, ever had another lead in the World Series. But I truly believe that if that does not happen, the way that everything was going to be lining up, that they were going to end up winning that game and going up 3 games to 1 and winning a World Series. So that's a very, very deep, deep Cardinals fan one. The real ones will know what I'm talking about, I guess. Or
Yeah,
maybe
no,
that's
that's a
maybe
good
that's
one.
my own obsession or my own compulsions, but I just remember that moment very, very well.
No, no, that's exactly why I want to do this with fans of the teams. Because if it was just me and another buddy, we're talking generalities, we're talking free agent signings, but I feel the same way about certain plays and moments in my fanhood where it's like, if only they didn't call, offensive holding on that one play, or if only, I forget the catcher's name, but if if he reads the pitch out and catches the runner at second. So that's why you're here and not somebody else. So,
I mean,
um,
especially in baseball, it's more insufferable when you just think about like sometimes foul balls and stuff like that. Like just like the little differences of just missing on those pitches. It's such a cruel, an unusual thing to do to yourself to be a hardcore baseball fan.
yeah,
It doesn't end
there's
well.
a
More times than not, it doesn't end well.
exactly. There's a real like romance about baseball with the torture and the fact that just the postseason just feels longer than any other, even basketball. We still have series in basketball, but just with you can live and die with every pitch of a game, and it's just there's nothing like it. And I'm
It's
speaking as a kind of a detached baseball fan, unfortunately, because of the whole Ace situation. But I really miss that aspect of it and watching my team in like high leverage, high pressure games.
Right. I mean, you and the A's always had, for most of, I mean, I'm not sure how old you are, but at least in the last 20 years, they have had some great teams to root for, some exciting teams, and they have been in some moments. They just haven't come through in those moments, unfortunately, which is a shame because they have had some years. I mean, those early 2000s A's, I mean, those were as good as any teams. I mean, those are, arguably could have been a trio of Hall of Fame pitchers. I mean, I don't know if Hudson's gotten in yet, but Zito for a while. I mean, when they were on top of their game, they were as good as any could be for sure. But the way I phrase it with baseball is that in a good season, you're still going to be like upset about like 60 to 70 times a year,
Yeah.
during a season. And even in a bad season, you're still going to be happy 60 to 70 times a season, checking that score the next day. And it's like, I always laugh when people who don't watch baseball's fallen out of habit. People that say that they don't watch baseball because there's too many games. I'm like, that never made any sense to me. Of that, it's like I don't literally watch every Cardinals game. I just get notifications on my phone and I check the score every day. Like it's like how people read their horoscope. It's just some reasons I'm happy, some reasons I'm not. If I get the opportunity to, I watch. But I don't build my life around it. I've never understood that. If that there's too many games for me to like this, it's like then that means you have more of an opportunity to watch it when you get around to it. Like.
Yeah, exactly. You always have something to watch, especially in the summer, which the shorter or slower sports time. So this was great, Ryan. Thank you so much for sharing your obviously deep passion for the Cardinals. And again, this is why I like to have fans of the team come on because we can talk about deep cuts and get real specific with things. So where can people hear more about your Cardinals fanhood and everything else?
So I have my podcast, The Scho Zone, which is available on YouTube. The SCHO, if you see my name displayed here, the Zone. It's on YouTube, and I also have it on Apple Podcasts and all of the major platforms that you have there. Where I kind of gained some traction, actually, was I went on a rant as the Cardinals were having an epic bullpen collapse last year. Started gaining a little traction leading into the baseball thing, so I'll be kind of playing that up. And then also on Twitter, at Scho525, SCHO525 is the handle I use there. And I also have a TikTok, which makes me cringe as I say that as a 39-year-old man. But it's one of those things where as I watch a game randomly, if I feel like I have a good rant or a good minute of a meltdown, I'm happy to share it because, you get to watch a crazy person that's not doing any harm only to himself.
No shame in that. You gotta reach the fans where they are, and they happen to be on TikTok and then all these other places. So, thank you again, man. Really appreciate it, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. Appreciate you having me.